Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Medcan Presents Tips for New Year Lifestyle Change with CEO Shaun Francis interviewing Medcan Director of Weight Management, Dr. David Macklin. Okay, tips for New Year Lifestyle Change. What does that look like? So we thought toward the end of the year, it's a good time. Everybody's thinking about how to improve their habits. So Dr. David Macklin is taking the knowledge that he knows from his time, 16 years as a weight management doctor, and taking those behavioral management tips and applying them not just to weight management, not just to your relationship with food, but numerous other things. So, we're talking about starting an exercise regimen, or maybe starting a mindfulness habit, anything where you're looking for some sort of element of lifestyle change that improves your wellness overall. Dr. David Macklin is going to talk about it, and Shaun is going to interview him through that. You have so a couple of administrative things to mention. We have the poll. Please respond to the poll. We'll end that in a few minutes. We also have questions, which we will be taking at the end of the webinar. So feel free to ask questions through the Q&A function. Also feel free to ask questions by the chat function. Okay. This webinar. So in the first act, we're going to talk about personal motivation and the science behind behavioral change. Shaun will interview David about that. The second act is about obstacles. So what are the things that prevent you from actually doing, we know the things that we should do. What are the things that actually prevent us from putting that knowledge into action? The third act is about resilience. So if you encounter these obstacles, or if you make a mistake in your habit, or if you backslide, how do you come back from that and still get back to a point where you're building this habit? That's what we're going to be working on. Okay, so our host and our guest. So host Shaun Francis is the chair and CEO of Medcan, a global leader in wellness and well-being. He's an avid runner, avid outdoorsman, avid cyclist. He's the author of the national bestseller, Eat, Move, Think, and he is the host of the Eat, Move, Think podcast. Shaun also is the founder and chair of True Patriot Love, a charity he established to benefit Canada's veterans and military families. Dr. David Macklin is a lecturer at the University of Toronto Faculty of Medicine and a University of Toronto trained family physician. David has committed his career to the prevention and treatment of obesity. He has for 16 years directed multidisciplinary evidence-based behavioral weight management programs. He is the director of the weight management program at Medcan. He's also director of weight management at Mount Sinai. He is a science committee member at Obesity Canada, and he is a co-author of the Canadian Action Study. David is also, David is also a co-author of the Behavioural Treatment Chapter in 2020 Canadian Clinical Practice Guidelines for the treatment of obesity in adults. Gentlemen, you can come in and start your cameras and unmute yourself. Shaun, how are you today?
Great. You can hear me okay, Chris?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for this. Dr. David Macklin, how are you?
Hey, Chris, really well, thanks.
With that, I'll just quickly end the poll. So the new year is a time that sees many looking to improve their wellness in some way. What form of behavioral change are you looking to conduct this year? Okay, so multiple answers are allowed. The best, so 74% are looking for to increase the amount that we exercise. Improving eating is a popular one. So we have develop a healthier relationship with food. Improving mindfulness or meditation practices is up there at 52% as well. So let's use this as a guide to the discussion overall. Shaun, why don't you take it away?
Sure. Thanks, Chris, and welcome to our listeners to an Eat, Move, Think webinar featuring Dr. David Macklin, who's a longtime Medcan physician and expert in weight management, and I'll preface that not just weight management, but behavioral change, which is what I want to really dig into today. David, you've talked about chronic disease as being so lifestyle originated. In fact, up to 80% of it might be accounted for by lifestyle factors. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah, it's kind of fun to tie this together with our discussion today. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. Looking forward to sharing some of my experience. The concept around New Year's and around behavior change, there's this maybe, let's say, lens that we could look at everything through, which is that studies after studies studying populations, so epidemiological studies, tell us that about 80% of all chronic disease will be attributed to really 5 behaviors that we are the author of and that we have control over as best we can control over them. And so the 5 behaviors are being at a best weight, being fit, strong, flexible, eating healthily, not smoking, and not drinking too much. So if you're online with those 5 behaviors, the numbers look like you duck under about 80% of all chronic disease. 20% will be bad luck, but that's really an answer to those who start to question, well, really, does this help? Or, I could get hit by a bus tomorrow, or, I might get sick anyway, or I have a strong family history of this. Is there really anything that I can do from a behavioral perspective that can change the likelihood of health and quality of life? And the answer is unmistakably yes. There's those behaviors to focus on. Now, one caveat: not easy to change, not easy to work on, but those are 5 really good targets as people start thinking about the new year and behavior change.
So I think what you're saying is we often hear or read that genetics is a predeterminer. So if I were to repeat, I think what you're saying it's 20% genetics and 80% lifestyle environment, or how would you break that down?
Well, actually, the best way to think of it is genetics, and most certainly there are people that are at risk of chronic disease because of genetics. And if you take the whole genetic risk of the whole entire population, the best way to think of it is genetics loads the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger or doesn't. And so it means that whatever we've been given, whatever's passed down when the sperm and the egg collided and all the DNA shuffled, and that's us, whatever we're given, we can duck under 80% of chronic disease with that through being on top of those 5 behaviors. It's a really positive message.
But you said it's hard to do, though.
Yeah.
So how hard for most people?
Well, the short answer is it's really variable. So 80% of the size of someone's body, their risk of living with obesity, is determined by genetics. And so they can work on finding their best weight, but there'll be an incredible variability in someone's capacity to both lose weight and keep it off. There'll be variability in any behavior change. And one of the things to kind of back up on, maybe a place to start then, would be as the listeners are figuring out which of these behaviors they might be offline with and what might be improvements they might look at and how to do it, there's actually a step we take in behavioral medicine that's a step backwards first. We step back and we say, one perspective for you might be the following: that, we're going to introduce you and invite you to consider that getting to a best weight or eating healthily or being fit, that these are actually long-term projects. In fact, if someone's going to succeed at the numbers we're looking for, it's best to consider these to be 20, 30, 40, 50-year projects, depending on someone's age. In other words, lifelong. So if this work, managing to be fit, managing to be at best weight, managing to eat healthily, if this is lifelong work, there's a starting point we use in behavioral medicine, which is to ask why first. Right. So what the question is, what possibly could be meaningful enough to you in your life that would make you willing to, and willingness is really the key word here. If this is chronic work, managing really to fight biology and be at a best weight or eat healthily or be fit and not drink too much and not smoke cigarettes. If it's long-term work, what's possibly meaningful enough to you to make you willing to do this long-term? And so where we start in behavioral medicine, I hope the listeners will find this helpful, is the concept of introducing the foundation of what's called values clarification. It's a really hot subject in behavior change medicine. A lot of evidence rests on the fact that if you first answer why, you're actually going to be much more likely to maintain changes long term. And it's kind of fun to think about long term change because it's New Year's and people think about kind of New Year's resolutions and those end up being short term. So that's the starting point. I can go into a little bit more about that.
Do we set ourselves up to fail with these New Year's resolutions, or are they good things to do?
Well, so we actually, in a way, by setting up ourselves for some New Year's resolutions, we don't set up ourselves to fail, but the processes that are in our way are obstacles that will, if unrecognized, make us fail. So let's start with the values piece, and then we'll go on to obstacles. So values. So here's a question. Someone they're deciding on their New Year's resolution and they want to get to a best weight. They want to start, we saw the two. We saw eating healthily and we saw fit, strong, flexible working out. So it's a fun question. Okay, you want to do those things and make those changes? Why? Well, I want to be healthier. If you can still ask why, you haven't got to the underlying value. And again, finding the value is a key for behavior change, clarifying your values, clarifying the underlying reason why you'll want to do this. You want to be healthy. Why? Do you want to be healthy so you can sit and watch Netflix with a lot of health? No, well, no. I want to be, I've got this, I want to have more energy. Okay, why do you want to have more energy? You'll be shocked, Shaun, at the number of people who will actually have not thought through kind of down to the level of a value. Wait, yeah, why am I willing? What's interesting to me to take on these changes? And so at the bottom will be something like, well, I want to be healthy and have more energy because, listen, I'm going to be a grandparent probably in the next year or so is the thinking. And I really want to, I really value time with my family. I want to duck under chronic disease. I want to be in the direction to where my weight and my health and my fitness are least preventing me. This is called a value statement, where I want to be in the direction to where they're least preventing me from doing the things I want to do long into the future. I want to travel. Retirement's going to come sometime soon. I want to be least limited from doing activity with my kids, with my grandkids. I really enjoy time at the cottage. I enjoy time biking. I want to travel and do adventures. And I want to be least limited from doing all these things. These are the things that are really important to me. If that's your foundation, your motivation, if that's your fuel to get up and go to the gym or to, even though it's cold outside, go forward with the workout that you had planned, then it's going to be more likely that you'll continue with those behaviors because these are now founded on things that are meaningful to you, right? That make you willing. It's the underlying values and they never change. So once you capture your values, write them down. I want to be working the direction to where my weight and my health are least preventing me, where my fitness is least preventing me, where my drinking is least preventing me from doing blank long into the future. And write it down and put it on your fridge, keep it. That comes before goals. Based on this value, this is my goal this week. I'm going to try to do this 3 times based on these values. And so, the next question you asked about was, are we setting ourselves up to fail? So think of it this way. This is kind of a transition in subject, or switching out of intrinsic motivation of what's going to be at the root of what's going to maintain these kind of motivations towards behavior change. And we're switching to what are the obstacles going to be? What's going to stand between someone? So what did people say? People said be more active or eat better. Well, what the obstacles are, the foundation obstacle in those 2 behaviors is as follows. We as humans, and this is a neurology subject. We're going right into the brain. We're going into the listeners' brains. Your brain, I would tell anyone who's listening, is built to drive you towards calorie acquisition and unhealthy food eating, and to drive you to sedentariness. Well, why the heck would our brain be interested in driving us to both of those? Well, it's because evolutionarily, those were the behaviors that most conferred survival. So for example, food, I heard eat healthily. Our brains were built for a time when calories were scarce and finding food actually required work. And so there has to be this subconscious motivational drive within our brain that will motivate us to do the work of getting food. And once we have food, also the motivational drive to eat as much as we can and store as much energy inside of us, because who knows when food's going to be available again. So it turns out, and again, there's genetic variability here in how strong someone's drive to food will be. It's a reflexive drive. It's in our subconscious. It gets conditioned through our lifetime. There's variability in who's vulnerable to this, but anyone who struggles with eating is going to have this as their primary obstacle. So they're not set up to fail, but the system is setting them up to have great difficulty. And if they're not going to receive support, I mean, what I love about Medcan is we have experts in weight management, in nutrition, and in fitness that don't just tell people what to do, right? The foundation of Medcan is to help people understand what are the obstacles between them and doing the things that they want to do. So we're driven to sedentariness as well, and some more than others. Sedentary, go test this out. If anyone's listening, I don't know if you're sitting down, kick up your legs and notice that sedentariness is pleasurable. It's pleasurable because it confers survival. Again, in a calorie depleted environment, using excess energy doesn't really help. And so it doesn't help survival, that is. And so we will, at a root level, some more than others, be driven. So, when will it show up? It's 7:30 in the morning, you're in bed, it's cold outside, and you have, a plan to go for a jog. Your brain's going to be at a reflexive level screaming, because that morning time has been paired with sedentariness and the pleasures of sedentariness so often that a conditioning's taken place that you're now subject to a want towards sedentariness. But if you know that obstacle's there, you can kind of say, oh, I know what this is. And because of the clarified values, and because of how important this is to me, and because I know this is just an obstacle, and once I get my shoes on and once I get my coat on, then I'm on my way, I actually feel better. Then you start to see how behavioral interventions at a medical level, at a Medcan level, can help support someone, not just by telling them what to do, by helping them understand the obstacles between them and succeeding long term.
David, one of our viewers on this note has a question. He says he's been described by some as burly, and it's attributed to his Latvian parents. And he's wondering, so I guess this goes back a bit to the genetic side of it. And you always hear some people saying, look, I metabolize slower, or I have a thyroid issue, or you name it. But do you reckon that, what do you recommend? Is it exercise more, or is it reduce the food for someone like this?
So this is someone who's saying they're burly and they're maybe struggling with weight to some degree, and their weight may be affecting their health and their quality of life, because that's where we start, right? So the first off, from genetic vulnerability, what that means is that this individual with genetic vulnerability, it shows up not through kind of thyroid problems, or secondary causes of struggling with weight are so rare. This is just kind of foundational stuff. So someone who's struggling with weight will, for example, we've learned from really cool twin studies done at Laval University back in the 90s, that if someone eats more calories than they're burning, so in other words, they're creating a calorie surplus, some people gain way more weight than others. You know that there are some people who are genetically able to, when they're eating more calories, their brain will respond by burning off as many of those extra calories as possible, and anything that they can't burn off goes into muscle. There are people on this planet who have that genetic advantage. Other people, if they create a calorie surplus, it goes straight to fat, stores in fat, and their metabolic rate doesn't change at all. So in other words, their body's not fighting off the fat getting stored into their body. That happens at a genetic level. The drive towards calories, how strongly my attention will be stolen towards an opportunity at food. Some people, God bless them, are not interested in food. They can't overeat for the life of them. At a genetic brain level, 70% of someone's risk of struggling with weight in their lifetime is conferred genetically, and nearly 100% of those genes are in the central nervous system. They're in the brain, in the places that regulate weight. And so the drive towards calories, the capacity to self-regulate against wanting and cravings, that's where all humans are different. Add conditioning that's taken place through a lifetime, add complicating factors potentially like stress, fatigue, depressed mood, anxiety, weight promoting medications, all of these things, ADHD can play in. All of these things can complicate someone's capacity to struggle with weight. We at Medcan talk about weight as a real medical condition. We talk about it as a genetically conferred, brain-centered, real medical condition for which effective, really effective treatment exists for. So the answer isn't telling you what to do. The answer is advising you you would benefit from supporting your real condition with real treatment. Very effective treatment, both behavioral interventions, even medication now is becoming better and safe and effective. Someone who struggles with weight deserves treatment, not advice. And treatment will become much more common over the coming years. And Medcan's actually at the forefront of offering effective, ethical, most effective nationally weight management treatments.
You just touched even on medication, and one of our viewers has that question. I don't want to depend on medication, she says, to stay healthy. So eating well and exercise is top of mind.
Right. So we think of, take a condition like high blood pressure. Someone comes into my office, as if I'm a family doc, and we get 3 or 4 readings in a row that their blood pressure is high. And we talk about eating healthily and exercising and managing their weight. And we look to support them in those changes, and yet they still come in and their blood pressure is up. In other words, they have not, with lifestyle alone, been able to manage this risk factor, which puts them at risk of heart disease and stroke. And so no one blinks at the idea that we would, with this chronic disease of hypertension, when an effort at lifestyle has been put forward, yet the blood pressure levels haven't come down into normal. No one blinks to think that you might still do all that lifestyle work, but have the addition of medication to bring down your blood pressure and reduce your risk of heart disease and stroke. So it will become less and less unusual for people to think specifically in weight management medicine, obesity medicine. It'll become much less unusual to think of really good, supportive, longitudinal behavioral interventions, plus or minus the adjunct of medication, depending on the individual's risk, level of struggle, and capacity to manage with behavioral intervention alone. We don't depend on our puffers. We use our puffers to treat our asthma. We don't depend on our diabetes medications to manage our blood sugars. We have treatment for our chronic condition of diabetes with medication. Certainly not everyone in weight management or other areas of lifestyle medicine require medication, but it's nice to know that medications are becoming more and more effective, certainly well tolerated and safe, and it will become less uncommon in someone's mind as an adjunct or an addition to the behavioral work that they can do.
Is there a medication, will there be a pill in the future that helps you lose weight?
In weight management, we are actually, in a way, at the precipice of, I anticipate within exactly 6 months from 2 weeks ago, that there will be an FDA approval of what will be the most notable weight management medication that we've seen in our time, both in safety and in the ability to dampen the wanting, the biological wanting, the drive within our midbrain that motivates us to food as humans. Oddly enough, this medication is extremely effective by replicating a natural hormone that does it ourselves. There's a hormone in our body called GLP-1. And we all make it. And after a meal, it gets released from our gut and it goes to our brain and it says, I've had enough. I'm good. It creates a signal and we all have it, and some have more than others. So the concept of where we're going in medications and weight management is you'll see replications of these natural appetite hormones that some people have more of and some people have less of. And those who have less will be able to kind of boost up. If someone's low in thyroid, they can take thyroid. Low in estrogen, they can take estrogen. What you'll see more and more over the next 5 years is simple replacements, or analogs they're called, of the natural hormone system that comes from our body to our brain to communicate we've had enough. And again, some people have a ton of it, some people have very few. And so it's kind of an evening of the playing field. But even with medication and an even playing field and wanting being managed from underneath, it's still all the work. It doesn't take responsibility away from anyone. In fact, it puts responsibility in front of someone, because now with an even playing field, now you're put in a position where you can do the behavioral work that sees you find your best weight and stay there. So it's a real nice kind of marriage. Medcan's quite leading in its behavioral weight management program of offering, if necessary and if appropriate, the adjunct of medication to support someone's sustained weight loss. Again, we're talking 30, 40, 50-year projects when we talk about lifestyle change.
I mean, you often too read about people getting surgery, gastric band surgery, maybe in more extreme cases. What's your position on that?
Sure. The foundation of these questions is based on the following. It is clarified, and I was a co-author, and we're very proud. We published 6.5, 7 weeks ago, a national clinical practice guidelines for the treatment of obesity. I was a co-author on the behavioral chapter. This was 80 plus professionals in Canada who specialize in weight management, writing guidelines that are really an international paper. And Canada leads the world in obesity recognition and treatment and support. It's something we should actually be very proud of. And the foundation of this document and the foundation of any clinical work with someone who struggles with weight is to help them understand that their struggle is real and it's a real condition, genetically conferred, centered in the brain, progressive in that it gets more and more difficult to manage over time. Our brain defends against weight loss by, this is unfair if I've heard anything unfair. If anyone is successful in losing weight, the brain is expert at recognizing fat loss and fighting against it and defending our former weight. If our ancestors lost weight, it was never to, it wasn't to look good in in wedding photos. It was because the food supply was interrupted. So in our brains, if we start to lose weight, the brain will counter weight loss with two things. It'll increase wanting, appetite, hunger, and it'll decrease metabolic rate, all in the effort that favors weight regain. So we found the answer to your question on that this is a real condition. And then we have 3 levels of treatment. We have behavioral intervention, which is really the foundation. At Medcan, I think it's very safe to say Medcan excels nationally, maybe internationally, in providing an evidence-based, ethical, effective behavioral foundation to weight management remotely, right, using remote medicine all across the nation. The second level of treatment is, and again, it's not necessarily one and then the next, but a second level of treatment is the adjunct of safer and more effective medications. And then surgery is just simply that next level of treatment for those who struggle more. Surgery has been shown to be an extremely effective and safe medication. The complications of surgery are on par in a good surgery center, on par with the complications that if someone has gallbladder surgery. So this is a safe, and it's interesting, the effect of gastric bypass surgery is ultimately on appetite from hormones in the body. One of the hormones after surgery that goes to the brain to block appetite after gastric bypass surgery is actually GLP-1, this hormone that we're now able to give as a medication. So we're really advancing. So really, actually, I speak to physicians all the time, nationally and internationally. I always say this is an incredibly exciting time for the field of obesity medicine and weight management medicine and lifestyle medicine because of the direction with behavioral interventions, remote access to patients, plus or minus the adjuncts of medication and surgery. We're really kind of at the stage where now people struggling with weight it's something we say is treatable, manageable. It's kind of exciting.
What do you, one of our viewers is asking, what is your best weight? How do you determine that for someone?
Sure. So that falls under, great question, falls under the concept of expectations. So I'm going to say something provocative. It's a funny way to think of it, but the advice from clinicians in ethical, effective behavioral weight management is the following. The invitation is to consider that your weight is actually not something you have control over. What we mean by that is that it's not a behavior. It's not something you can do. In fact, there's a 1 million year old appetite system that recognizes fat loss and tries to push against it. How strongly is your brain going to push against weight loss? It turns out that's a variable trait primarily determined by genetics. So we invite people instead to develop the following. Here's the path. Here's your invitation on expectations and weight loss. The question is, would you consider your organizing to be finding the least amount of calories, the most modest lifestyle you can put together that still very powerfully maintains a loyalty to fun and food and friends and socialization and celebration, all the things you value from food at a level of effort that is sustainable and livable and doable. So in other words, you work on finding your most modest lifestyle that is enjoyable and sustainable, and then just stand back and let your brain and body tell you where your best weight is. All human weight loss looks like this. People start losing weight, it starts to go down, it slows and slows and slows, and it kind of just pulls in somewhere, formerly called a plateau. We actually invite people to consider that flattening is where you're pushing down, your brain's fighting back, and you guys are forming a peace treaty. And that's a spot where you can land and consider staying because you've arrived at that best weight, living a lifestyle that you can maintain long-term at a level of effort that you can maintain long-term.
So you're saying, the journey begins with you wanting to start the journey, it sounds like, and trying to lay the foundation for why you're doing this. Like what problem are you trying to fix and why are you trying to fix it?
So all lifestyle change, back to the big list. We're talking about eating healthily, getting to a best weight, being fit, strong, and flexible, not drinking too much, and not smoking cigarettes. So the concept is finding the intrinsic motivation as to why, as I mentioned earlier, is the beginning. And so now the next step is to find out what obstacles stand between us and these changes. We talked about how we're driven naturally to foods that are higher in calorie, more dense in energy, higher in quick energy, fat, sugar, salt. These types of foods are what we're naturally driven to because of evolutionary advantages these foods offered us. And so the human brain is driven at a natural point to favor these types of foods. That is an obstacle. We talk about how from the activity, so maybe the listeners are thinking about becoming more fit and really wanting to push their activity levels. Yes, the intrinsic why is where we start. What possibly could be important enough for you to set on your 30, 40-year journey of maintaining activity regularly? But then the next step is, what are the obstacles between me and regular physical fitness? And the answer again is that we are at the root, at the brain level, and this is where we land. At the brain level, we are at risk of experiencing a natural drive, a wanting, a desire to sedentariness. How do we overcome these? Here's some good practical tips. So let's go to the end and go backwards. With physical activity, this is a fascinating clinical trial that was done that states it cost millions of dollars, and it stated the most obvious thing. So I love this for helping kind of as a practical point for listeners to help understand how they maintain physical activity levels at a level they would like to maintain long term. This study found that the predictors of long-term success in humans in physical activity are two things. And it might sound super straightforward, but if you think about it, it's something that any one of our listeners can work on today if they're really interested in improving their physical fitness. One is if people enjoy the actual activities that they're doing. And two is after activity, if people find that there's a positive emotional experience. In other words, they feel good afterwards. So hold on, let's back up. I know that sounds really simple, but it rests on a learning theory that is the most common learning theory in humans, which is called either Skinnerian or operant conditioning. If we conduct a behavior and the behavior is enjoyable and it's followed by a reward immediately, in other words, in this case, feeling good, it's just more likely to happen. So we can counsel people to say, okay, you're interested in physical activity. Would you consider checking these two things out? Find stuff that you enjoy and spend some time after your physical activity to reflect and notice if you actually feel better. So what would that look like? We see people often taking on physical activity that they're killing it and they hate it, but they know they got to do it. And so they're in the gym and taking on things that they don't really enjoy, but they feel they just have to. And in fact, they don't even feel good afterwards because they've, maybe induced pain or discomfort. So I know this might sound very straightforward, but if it's about long-term behavior change, find something that you do that you enjoy. And that can take some time, but once you do, also reflect afterwards and notice that, actually I feel a sense of accomplishment. I feel light. I feel my mood is better. I feel kind of happy. I feel in the direction of the things that are important to me. Thank you. I kind of focused on the outcomes, and that's reinforcing, and it's going to make it more likely that at 7 a.m. when it's cold outside, that person's more likely to get up because they'll say, listen, sure, I could stay in bed, but I know if I get up, I'll feel better. How do I know that? I studied it, right? The Medcan team helped me recognize the aftermath of exercise and stick to it.
Or do we chunk this down into smaller steps versus saying, hey, I want to work out more?
We can break it down to as small the steps as we wish. We focus on our values. We focus on the obstacle of being driven to sedentariness. And actually, really, the last point is the following. Tell me, Shaun, if this makes sense. But the last concept is this, and this is really big in New Year's behavior change. Again, I don't care if we're talking about less drinking, quitting smoking, getting to a best weight, eating healthily, or being fit. All those behaviors. What's going to be common in all of those, and this is a very common message from Medcan staff to people who are looking to change behavior. The concept is, I'm going to introduce to everyone looking to change their behaviors that they can anticipate one thing, which is setbacks. Setbacks in any of these behavior changes are natural. You're going to miss that workout day. You're going to actually twist your ankle, so you're going to miss a week of being active. You're going to have an off-track eating day. You'll get on a scale and see a number not in your favor. You'll end up eating foods that you had really tried to stay away from, and yet you found you ate those. You'll have quit smoking, and you'll find yourself out in a high-risk setting, and you'll have had a cigarette. All of these things are going to happen. So the next question is, it turns out success in any behavior change and any lifestyle change, one of the absolute key predictors is not whether you have setbacks. You can actually count on having setbacks. One of the key determinants of successful behavior change long-term, to turn a New Year's resolution into something that's 20, 30 years, one of the key determinants is not whether you have these setbacks, but how you respond to them. So it just turns out, and here we're going to jump into the psychology. This is where think affects eat and move. This is the feedback loop from eat, move, think. This is think looping back into eat and move. And it works in the following way. If a human has a setback, and this is something that they have to any degree struggled with in the past, there'll be an automatic set of thoughts that will get generated. Things like, I'm so bad at quitting smoking. I've tried so many times and now I screwed up again. It's never going to work. I'm trying to eat healthily, and on Saturday I ate way too much food, and this stuff's no good. Clearly I'm no good at this. I don't have enough willpower. I'm not strong enough. Someone misses a workout and they're like, you know what, crap. For a short time I can be active, but I lose momentum always. This is just like me. Really, ultimately, I'm lazy. Clearly I'm no good at this. All these will be automatic thoughts that someone will experience, and they're opportunistic. They don't come all the time. They come after a setback in behavior change. And so if your team at Medcan can help you understand both that setbacks are natural and that when they happen, automatic thoughts come that speak poorly about your capacity to make these lifestyle changes. If you now are in recognition of these automatic thoughts, now you're in a position to change them, to say, wait, is that really true? This is just like me. So for example, someone will say, but wait, I've never been treated comprehensively for physical fitness and exercise like I have with the team of support that I have at Medcan. I've never been supported and treated to eat healthily with a comprehensive process and support and program like I'm getting at Medcan. So people can already start to challenge those automatic negative thoughts by saying, but that was me on my own, not being supported and treated for what I've learned is actually a real difficult thing to change long-term. So they can start challenging their thoughts. That's called cognitive restructuring. That's the foundation of cognitive behavioral therapy. It's something that really so many of the staff excel at in both the psychology group at Medcan, but also all the behavior change from eat to move and to weight management, helping someone change their thinking so they can change their behavior. So be wary as you set up your New Year's resolutions. The advice is setbacks are going to happen. Automatic thoughts that speak poorly about your capacity to succeed long-term could come automatically, result in frustration, disappointment, and demotivation. And by recognizing that obstacle, that's a real nice door opener to turning what is a New Year's resolution into a 20, 30, 40-year new behavior.
Chris, do I have time for one last question?
Yeah, why don't we go for one last question and then we'll start wrapping it up after that.
So, David, we hear often how important sleep is. Is this another foundational element for everything you've talked about, or is it something we're also genetically programmed not to do as well as we age?
So what does poor sleep do? Poor sleep replicates actually stress. If you really want to think about short sleep duration, which is the phrase, if you want to think about short sleep duration and the consequence of fatigue, and why it is associated with sedentariness and poor fitness, It's associated with obesity, and it's associated with poor eating styles, and it's associated with smoking and drinking too much. So why? Why is it associated with all those things? Because it actually emulates the stress response in our brain. It turns out that if our ancestors didn't sleep much, it was because they couldn't, because there was a challenge to their survival. This is very much on par with stress. Cortisol gets released. When a stress response happens in our body, the signal to our brain will drive up the drive to sedentariness and try to relax. We will be drawn away from physical activity. We'll have stronger drives to high calorie foods and higher amounts of food. This is a really straightforward connection. And again, it's from the body to the brain. You can count on poor sleep duration and fatigue, amping up the drive to overeat, dampening your capacity to be physically active because you're tired, and driving up your drive towards alcohol, towards cigarettes, towards eating poorly. But there's one more piece with sleep. So we talked about how it increases the drive from underneath towards off-track behaviors. And if this isn't unfair, I also don't know what is, but from the top down, our capacity to self-regulate, to stop and say, wait a second, I don't need this. I'll feel better if I don't. Wait a second, this activity is important to me, so I really want to push through and do this activity, because it's aligned with my values. We call that top-down executive self-regulation. It's actually where all of the work happens in the front of our brain. That part also goes to sleep when we're too tired. So we have a stronger drive from underneath to go in the wrong direction. And we have a weaker capacity from the top down to self-regulate over these impulses. So it's really like an unfortunate 1-2 punch. So it's not that sleep is directly impacting our health negatively. It's how it affects our behaviors that impact our health. And so defending your sleep, never underestimating how important it is a really, really nice piece of sustained behavior change.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you, David. It sounds, well, it sounds like it's we need sleep, and it's a lifelong challenge to fight against our genes to really stay healthy and have that longest, highest quality of life.
Yeah, I mean, the take-home executive summary to everyone would be that obstacles exist, and there's a kind of a progression of expert teams. And I think Medcan is just an incredible example of this, of expert teams in healthcare that help support someone with intrinsic motivation, overcoming obstacles, and maintaining resilience as they move forward into taking something that is tough on your own, but with a real supportive expert team can become not a flash in the pan, but instead a sustained behavior change. It's something I think Medcan's really proud of.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
You want to wrap up?
Thanks. Yeah, sure. Thanks, Shaun. Thanks, Dr. David Macklin. I am going to just, I would be remiss, I would be remiss on a couple of things. So our webinar attendees have been great, providing some tips for people. So one of the tips is that I have always found that my fitness gym workouts reinforce my motivation to go on my next outdoor adventure, and my outdoor adventures reinforce my motivation to get back to my workouts. I think that's a great tip. And then another provides such tips as have your floor space clear at bedtime, leave comfy clothes beside your bed, choose a great piece of music, and then move to it as soon as you wake up. I think that's a great tip too. Okay, upcoming webinars. How to Eat Mindfully with Leslie Beck is our next one. That's we'll see you next year. This is in 2021, January 12th, Tuesday at 12:30 p.m. And that's about mindful eating. So it's I would say a companion a little bit to this one, which is nice. Folks, if you want to make an appointment with the weight management program and Dr. David Macklin, so you could send an email to weight@medcan.com or place a phone call at 416-350-5918. That's 416-350-5918. To sign up for the next webinar, go to bit.ly/medcan-mindful-eating. We'll include that link in the webinar mail out, which will go out later today or tomorrow. And that will also provide an archive of this presentation as well. Lastly, we would talk about Medcan Presents other resources. So that's the latest podcast episode for Eat, Move, Think is the Year in Wellness. And there's Shaun Francis right there. And I walking through the show's 10 best moments in wellness of the 43 episodes that we made in 2020. So that's great. Dr. David Macklin, Shaun Francis, thank you so much for this webinar attendees. Thank you. And we will see you in the new year. Thanks very much.